Everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of We've All Done It. Today we are going to address a topic that I think I've heard about since I started working decades ago. We're going to really jump into what is the role or roles of HR. What are some misconceptions? How do you leverage your HR team? So we're going to break down that whole concept, that whole conversation with the lovely Miss Jill. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So thank you for being brave because this is a big topic. But before we jump into it, can you please introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about you?
Okay. Hi, everyone on the listening side. My name is Jill Alarcon. I am an HR professional, began my career in recruitment, specifically in the healthcare setting, worked in the GovCon space for about 7+ years, and made a formal transition into HR after obtaining my master's degree with a focus in human capital strategy. I was really disheartened by hiring great talent, but not having an impact on their journey at the organization to follow. And so that's what really drove my interest in overseeing the full plethora of all things human resources. What I've been known for and sort of has become my niche is either operating as a solo HR practitioner or establishing HR from the ground up and building a team under me. And I've done that for a few different organizations, to include a holding company that had 2 organizations under it that shared benefits but had different operating schedules and client types, as well as I spent the prior nearly 7 years as chief people officer for a communications consulting firm doing really mission-driven work for the federal government. I left that opportunity last April and launched my fractional human resource consulting business, Vybrant HR, officially in May, and it's been going strong. So I want to be able to make an impact for these organizations that have non-existent HR and really be influential in their success.
So this is why I'm so excited to have you here, because you literally have worked in all aspects of HR. You've had to create entire HR departments. So when we get into what is HR, I am so grateful that you're brave enough to have this conversation, but to talk about what it really is, because I know throughout my career how confused people become of what technically, when we say HR, let's just start there. When we say HR, what does that mean? Can we define what is under the umbrella of HR?
Let's jump back. Historically, HR has been much more viewed as much more of an administrative function. Paper pushers, helping with benefits, making sure you have your PTO balances, creating policies, which are very important if done well. But I think HR has really gotten both a positive and negative reputation for itself over the years. Like any industry and field, there are great HR practitioners and there are awful HR practitioners. And I like to think I'm on the upper side and really take great pride in the work that I do for the companies and the employees to be the best version of myself for them. But I think the role of HR, especially in smaller to mid-sized organizations, is to really influence the policies, programs, total benefits offerings, and ensuring that, the culture aligns with the company's overall business goals and objectives, and that everything is really working in tandem with the business and its goals and its leadership and executive team. I think that's critical to its success, and it will ensure that you're aligning the right people to the needs of your business.
So the thing I think about HR frequently is people, usually when I'm hearing about it, they're angry, right? Because you're only usually going to HR when something is wrong. And so we're going to get to that in a second. But what I think gets often missed is those quiet pieces that are so critical to an organization's just daily function. So when you talk about things like policies and procedures, those allow us, it's kind of like the rules of how we are going to treat each other and what we're going to do. And some of them are legally mandated, right? Like there's a lot that HR, like if you don't have in place, you can get in really bad trouble with the government. Am I
Mhm.
correct?
Absolutely. That's one of the areas I specialize in is compliance. It's not the
Yeah.
only thing because there's so many other elements to HR, but yes, federal compliance, state, and even local regulations. And they're
Yeah.
always evolving and not at the same time. So you've got to stay on top of that. And many employers post-pandemic are in multiple states.
Yeah.
So it's something we have to stay on top of.
So you think about like, which I like the word compliance, which I don't think people often think of it in that sense, but like benefits, making sure like your insurance and, all the other perks when you think about it. Cause I think benefits sometimes we used to call them perks. But the benefits that we create, but I often feel like there's a lot that gets lost and missed. So,
Mhm.
because again, usually when you're engaging with HR, it's when you first get hired, it's if it's in the messy middle where something really bad happens,
Mhm.
or when you're leaving, right?
Right.
So, like the only times it's usually great is when you're just onboarding. So, what, from your perspective, what would you think is the biggest misconception? Knowing that much of the time when people are engaging with HR, it may not be in the best of moments. What would you say is the biggest misconception?
I think the biggest misconception is that HR is only there to protect the company. And while that is an important element of our role, I like to think that we really walk that fine middle ground. And it's not easy, let me tell you, because we've been employees. We are employees. We want to have a good experience. We want you to have an exceptional
Yeah.
experience. Let's face it, if people are enjoying their role and feeling, empowered in what they do, then they're going to put out a better work product, which benefits their team members and ultimately themselves and the company so that everyone's growing and evolving and not remaining stagnant or not dipping in performance. But, so much goes on in between all of that. And a lot of times we're working on big projects behind the scenes or prepping for a benefits renewal or thinking about new policies and strategies and how we're going to sell that to the executive team to benefit the whole organization. And then often, many times a day, we're putting out fires, right?
Yeah.
A manager did the wrong thing. They didn't come to us in time to strategize on a proactive solution or the best way to handle it. They said the wrong thing. They brushed it under the rug and now they want to terminate somebody. Well, it doesn't work that way. You can't do that. It doesn't, for a million reasons I could go on and on. So a lot of times it's somewhere in that middle because we haven't done a good enough job of educating, and I just say we in general, management, HR, everyone, of educating those senior and middle managers on what their expectations are as leaders in organizations. Or often what I see in many companies, especially smaller and mid-sized companies, that managers are both managers and doers, right?
Yeah.
They're leading teams, they're interacting with clients, they have their own deliverables, and they're trying to empower and motivate their team to set timelines and expectations on whatever the deliverables are. So it's complex and there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of emotions, and some leaders have too much empathy and care too much and only want to try to keep the employee happy without setting realistic expectations and having I like to say constructive conversations, which can be difficult. And a lot of managers are afraid of having those conversations, or they just ignore it or only want to take a harsh stance, which makes people hate their manager or feel micromanaged and just not excited about what they're doing. So then the employee retreats. So anyways, I think I digressed quite a bit, but the misconception ultimately is that we are only there to protect the employer when really we want what's best for everyone within reason, and everyone, including ourselves. We are employees too.
Well, so I'm glad you said that because what I have often talked to people about is if you as an employee are facing something that you know is inappropriate, HR is there not only to protect like your boss, but they're there to protect you because they don't want a lawsuit. Like let's
Yeah.
just speak like nuts and bolts. Like if you're in a situation that is you feel is wrong or there's something inappropriate, yeah, they will protect you. Because they're not going to want to back behavior that puts the company in a position of being sued or being on the wrong side if you will. And so I think that that's part of where the misconception is. They think they're just protecting leadership when the truth is they're trying to protect what is the right thing for the company and the culture and the environment. And sometimes that actually means protecting you, the employee, but they can't help you if they don't know.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think a lot of employees are fearful to share information because maybe they don't have a trusting relationship with
Yeah.
HR. They see HR as best friends with an executive team member who won't have their back. There's so many reasons, or, they don't feel they're treated fairly or equitably for a number of reasons. I've seen it all. I've seen cases in past employers where I led HR where the number one most, the number one salesperson is bringing in the largest amount of revenue, yet is killing the culture. And it's in
Wow.
every exit interview. And unfortunately, because of that, I ended up leaving as well. I couldn't influence the culture anymore. And as HR, that's really disheartening for us. Other times I have successfully terminated somebody nearly immediately when something was brought to our attention with the right evidence
Mm-hmm.
related to harassment or other things. And then there's a lot that's more of a gray area where we have to do our due diligence and say, have private one-on-one conversations with different team members and understand the timelines and what exactly was said and happened, and make our best judgment call based on the information that's presented to us. But like you said, if nobody tells us, we can't help. And we really do want to help. We
Yeah.
want this to be a great place for you to work, and you're at work more than anywhere else. We all want to, try to enjoy it as much as we can.
Well, and it's so funny because two of my closest friends are senior HR leaders. And I think it's so funny that you keep talking about how we want a good experience too. We are employees too. Because I have my own experiences with cultures and companies and HR, and I know what a great HR felt like. I know what a not so great HR felt like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what I think in being friends with them is seeing the personal toll it can take, because you guys are often, to your point, putting out fires, fixing messes, being brought in way later than you should have to maybe avoid a bonfire or an implosion. What would you share with people about the personal aspect of being HR that maybe people don't realize?
That's a great question. It is a huge emotional toll, and it is so hard to let it go at the end of the day at all. You try your best, but we care so deep. Well, the great HR people care deeply. And I think the other thing about HR is we have a high degree of confidentiality for numerous reasons, right? We cannot disclose certain information, even if somebody's one of our good friends in the organization, right? And you have to be really careful also about who you make friends with. So it's really lonely sometimes in HR, especially on a smaller team where you don't have other HR colleagues to discuss it with, right? It gets really, really challenging from that degree. And sometimes you don't want to go to your peers on the executive team because you don't want to look like you're complaining or you don't have the answer, but no one knows everything and every situation is unique. So we're sometimes learning as we go to no fault of our own. But emotionally, it's very challenging. And I think a lot of us wear that, on our sleeves or hide it inside because we want to come off as strong and, knowledgeable and supportive and, moving through the pieces appropriately. But it can be really, really hard.
Well, and I would, so when I think about leadership and, when leadership being hard, HR is frequently on the brunt end of the people part, right? So you are navigating the politics, the people, and the policy at a level that is so different than just an average leader. And I think the statement you made about it can be very lonely that is such a powerful statement, because I think about like how many times I've had meetings with different HR leaders or HRBPs because I'm in my own mess, and
Right.
and maybe taking the moment to appreciate that they are literally going from fire to fire to fire. So when they walk in that room looking like death warmed over, that it's nothing personal, right? Because I
Yeah.
think so much of it, we internalize it, oh, they just don't care about me. I think sometimes it's a lot. And I mean, how you guys navigate burnout and exhaustion and just the emotional drain of having to go from thing to thing. Because, like I said, you guys don't get called when things are great.
Right.
Rarely does that happen unless somebody
Right.
wants you to plan like an office engagement event or something. But
Oh,
you're
and
not
don't
the
get me
one who's
started on being the event planners.
well, in small to medium businesses, that's
Yeah,
usually where it falls to, right?
it's true.
But the reality of it is rarely is your phone ringing or is your inbox full of I have to tell you great news.
Right.
And so I would hope that if people listening could take one thing away, it's just to realize yes, you chose this field, and sometimes if you guys aren't the happiest, bubbliest of people, it's not personal. It could just be that it's a grind.
Yeah, exactly. I think the fun part of our job where we get to be really creative is both coming up with sort of like, again, that holistic benefits. I don't like the word benefits, just
Yeah.
holistic offerings for the team as the company's growing and reassessing and what the needs are of everyone, especially with such a diverse level of staff across different, parts of the country or even the world, depending on if your organization is global. But the other thing I love to do in my role is a lot of resource planning. So if a new project or client's coming on, or you're expecting growth, kind of strategizing, okay, who tentatively might take that role internally? What opportunities are there to advance them or let them try something new and prove themselves and grow into that role? Or what are the external resources we need? And really thinking through that kind of game of chess, that I really find to be a lot of fun because it allows you to help folks grow internally and bring in fresh, new people and talent to the organization.
So interesting. So, okay, so we talked about there's good HR, there's bad HR. So if I'm somewhat of a new leader, right? Um, how how would you advise I develop a healthy relationship with my HRBP or if it's a smaller organization, just the HR department? Like what would be good things for a leader to do to nurture a good relationship?
Okay, if they're new to the organization, I would hope that the HR leader or HRBP would reach out to them to schedule one-on-ones because I take a very proactive stance to HR. And I think that the best HR folks do as well. But if they don't, then you as the new leader should be proactive and schedule, one-on-ones, coffee chats, whatever it may be, based on the organization and how they're set up and their culture.
Yeah, they
To
all call them something else.
yeah, they all have different names, but virtual and person, figure out what the organization does and their sort of best practices. But, or if you don't know, just ask. You're not expected to know everything right away. You're learning too. You're new. Maybe not new to leadership, but new to leadership there. But I would say just get to know them and let them get to know you and, what's gone well in the past. Are there any best practices in management and specifically that I should be aware of? Any procedures, policies? Is that outlined somewhere in a guideline document? I know I've made plenty of those to sort of like manager 101 docs of here's like how we do things consistently across the board for this, that, and the other, you name it, I've covered it. I think it's important for them to understand that and just, again, have that relationship so that they can come to their HRBP or leader when they have a question, and it shouldn't be looked down upon because, again, not everyone has all the answers and no one situation is the same. So a leader should also feel comfortable coming to their HRBP with, a question, a challenge, and a potential solution, but use it as an opportunity to brainstorm, right? I don't, my last organization taught me this, that everybody should really try to aim to be solutions oriented. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that showcases a lot about people that you're not just there to complain, but there to really solve a problem. And maybe it's not the right answer, but it's a start and you figure it out together. And then you take the next steps and and maintain open communication. So trust and communication.
So let's talk about, I agree with that completely. I can say, It's so funny because I can think back immediately through my career of people of the HR that I had good relationships with and how that helped me actually grow. Because again, they're part of their job too, depending on the organization, may be involved in the succession planning of the
Right.
organization, right? So they have the best global sense of talent, who's coming in, who's going where, what are they wanting to do. I can also like see faces of people that I was like, I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times I emailed you. I tried and it wasn't there.
Ugh,
But and again, like having that compassion and understanding that it could just be a rough patch. And also like some people just aren't there, right? Like to your point, sometimes they're just trying to do the best they can with where they
yeah.
are. And they may be in the throes of burnout. Let's be clear, because
Yeah.
this is not, I think this is a job that's a division that's prime for burnout. And I often feel like this is an area that is often understaffed
Yeah.
because
That's
people, I
true.
don't think, understand the enormity of everything that falls under the umbrella.
Yes, there's a lot of complexity. I think the other thing is if the organization themselves does not value the function of human resources, then you're likely not going to have a motivated and empowered HR representative. And
Yeah.
in turn, it's just going to trickle effect down through the whole company. So I try to stay away from organizations like that because I want to be, I want to know that what I do is appreciated and valued, and I'm empowered in my role to make decisions that better the employees and the organization.
Yeah, I can say I agree with that. I think is the more toxic the HR function is, you can see it in the organization because
Yeah.
I believe HR sets the standard for how people are going to treat each other, what will and won't be tolerated.
Hmm.
To your point, I agree with that completely. Like it, and I think the C-suite has a tremendous amount of influence too. For instance, if they take your advice, if you come and
Right.
say, "Hey, this person really should go," I get they're a star at a shining star, but this is the impact they're having to your
Hmm.
broader or operations. And if they take that recommendation, I think that's or at least come up with a plan of what are we going to
Exactly.
do to mitigate the damage that's being done.
Right. Do you silo that person because they should no longer be in a managerial capacity, but they're really great at what they do?
Yeah.
That's usually a good start.
But
I've found,
again, but you
but
have to
it's
have a
balance.
C-suite that is even interested in having that conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to, because I think this is important, and while I have an expert on the show, so one of the first things I was taught as a new leader was document, document, document. If I don't have it documented, it did not happen. So help expand upon that advice. Is that still good advice? Is it not good advice? Talk me through your thoughts about that.
It is very good advice because when you are ready, you've gotten to all the steps and you've taken the appropriate actions internally to terminate somebody, worst case scenario, of course, and hopefully it doesn't get there. But you, manager, are also liable, right? It's not just HR or the company. I mean, your name could be brought up if that employee were to sue the organization, right? So it matters. You have another level of responsibility as a leader or people manager to do that. And documentation doesn't, I feel like people over like complicate it. It doesn't need to be that difficult. Have a Word doc, have a system, preferably on your computer and not in a notebook that you have to go filing through. Name it something reasonable, keep it in a folder where you have one for each, whatever concern or different people. I would organize it by individual and make note of what the issue was. Was it small and you're handling it, or maybe not even? And if it's a sort of first warning, I always try to operate from like a coaching perspective. Okay, you're struggling with this because here's what I need to see. Here's how we're going to achieve that. I, expect this, and this by this date. They'll come to you, you'll work it out and come up with a system. If it becomes repetitive, then you need to make note of, okay, on this day we talked about this, the problem persisted. Now I'm seeing this, and then have another follow-up conversation, but follow up after a verbal conversation, it's critical to put it in email and writing. Based on our conversation, we discussed, the plan is, let me know if you have any questions. That way it's out there for the employee to see you're on the same page and they can respond if they didn't feel like that was effectively communicated or understood it differently. Because let's be honest, one thing is said, but it's not always heard or interpreted the same way. So you just have to be really thoughtful about that. And then, of course, if it gets to the place where you're at a performance improvement plan, you have the documentation already there and you're doing it. And I always see too that I know that often people see performance improvement plans as like the push out the door, but I've seen them done successfully and employees improve and go on to thrive at a company. So I think it's really about how the company handles it and how their HR team and leadership team treats those. And maybe you give it a different name or whatever the case is. Talk about that in an entire other podcast. But my point is, it's important to protect yourself. You never know what's going to come out of the woodwork with somebody. You just don't know.
Yeah.
And managers should be aware of, different regulations like the Americans with Disability Act or things of that nature, because there are rules based on your size of the number of employees you have and things of that nature of what laws and going back to the compliance piece, what federal regulations you have to cover and what protections employees have too from accommodations and things like that. So as HR, we think about all these things, but I think managers, and to no fault of their own, again, like I said, they're so busy. Why would they know all these things? But it's our job as HR to educate managers. Now, they might not always remember it, but when things pop back up of just like, have you thought about this? Have you covered that? Or so-and-so mentioned they have, this medication they're on. Okay, well, that's a lot. And you're just bringing that to me 6 months later. That's not helpful. But again, I could go on and on. I'm sure this is common at pretty much every organization, but there's just that. I think that's the other part when you say like, what should people know about HR? There's a lot that keeps us up at night, like what people don't know that would be most relevant to the unique situation they're in. And without knowing all the details, we can't give guidance. And that kind of stuff gives me like a lot of anxiety.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, like, I just, even as like a leader, even though I technically have never been an HRBP, just being near you guys and understanding, when you are getting into a position where a performance improvement plan or whatever you call it is in place, you're talking about people's lives, right? I have never fired someone flippantly. I have never put someone on a performance improvement plan flippantly. Right. Because I understand the implication of like, this is a life-changing event. And now granted, that may not apply for everybody, but I know it stressed me out every time.
Yeah.
And I don't want to
believe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, finish what you were saying, then I want to backtrack to something you said.
Performance improvement plans also stress the employee out. So I think about it too, just as a human and an employee, like you're not going to operate your best in that type of an environment either. So hopefully the manager is taking the right steps leading up to and avoiding that big, scary step at the end to either reallocate the employee to another part of the organization or help them overcome that challenge. And now they're succeeding,
Yeah. Trust me. Yes. I have so many thoughts on that, but we're not going to go there. The one thing I wanted to add when we were talking about documentation, because we were talking about it from a leadership perspective, because I do want to provide like some of the other, if you are an employee that feels that you are not being led well, because like I can tell stories, not just of my own, but of like people I've worked with, people that I know who have leaders that can be fickle sometimes or don't remember what they told them to do and said, I don't remember us having this conversation. If your leader does not send that follow-up conversation of like, hey, we discussed this. This is the actions we agreed to. Here's the time frame we agreed to. You can do that yourself.
Yes.
As an effort, because documentation goes both ways, I feel. And to your point, like, no, you don't need to like record people. Like we're not in the FBI, folks. But I do
you have to be careful about recording because there's laws about that in every state and they're different.
Bingo. And but just the simple act of a follow-up email of today we discussed this this is what we agreed to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm committed to doing. Here's what you committed to doing. So that there's that shared communication.
Mhm.
So that if, for instance, you have that leader who's like, I don't remember that conversation, that email now exists where you said, hey, here's what we discussed. And it
Yes.
happened within like 24 hours. You sent that email within 24 hours of the meeting. Does it add extra workload? Yes. But if we're coming back to wanting to make sure we are protecting ourselves and ensuring that we're trying to build the culture from a top down and bottom up perspective, I say that's one way to do it. You know what I mean? And it doesn't have to be this onerous, it's like I always think it's like very sinister, like documentation. But
Yeah.
it's more of like, how are we making sure, to your point, just because we had a conversation doesn't mean we heard and understood the same thing.
Yes.
Or that you and I didn't leave our meeting and immediately get thrown into like the spin cycle on something else, and our short-term memory just didn't commit. It's not always a malicious issue. Sometimes it was just we're human and things get forgotten.
Yes, I don't know if you could see all the light bulbs going off in my head as I'm speaking, but I agree 100, like wholeheartedly. Proactive communication is critical no matter the situation, right? It's
Yeah.
so helpful. Like even if you're not in a situation where it's a performance related thing, maybe you're, an aspiring leader and you want to showcase your proactive nature to the team and follow up with the, manager and say, can I write the follow up and the do outs for everybody? You know what I mean? Just little things like that. But from a protective perspective, if you are concerned, and it's interesting that you bring this up, I had a girlfriend of mine call me a few weeks ago because she had some changes in her leadership and wanted to chat a little bit about how she can just look out for herself because she's been with her organization for many years and has never had an issue, and absolutely loves where she is and doesn't want to leave. She wants to continue to grow there, which I think is phenomenal. But I told her, just protect yourself, write down everything, do those follow-up emails yourself, like take that upon yourself, make your own file, BCC your personal email. You never know when you might need it. I mean, you just have to, let's be real. Employers want to protect themselves
Correct.
and employees want to protect themselves too.
Yeah.
So why, and if I hear an employer say your family, well, guess what? There's dysfunctional families out there. We have our given family and we have our chosen family. So choose wisely.
It's so
And
funny
call
because
your employees your family.
it's just so funny. So, particularly in younger generations,
Yeah.
companies that have that as part of their pitch are immediately red flagged.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
I get
and
it.
it's because, yes, just FYI, and
No, I
it's so funny
agree. I
because
think
I
it's
feel like
terrible.
being a Gen Xer, like I have seen what the baby boomers like coached me to do and what work was supposed to be. And then over the course of just a couple decades, how that same idea and sentiment is now seen as a very toxic trademark of an
Yes.
organization. But I love that you said that dysfunctional families. Yes, there are many. But like the same thing to you. Like I had a good friend, same thing. She's ended up with a new leader, and like her leader kept saying, I don't remember us having these conversations. And that was
Yeah.
one of the first things I said is, are you sending those follow-up emails? Like immediately after you talk, send that email. And it
Mhm.
does drive work. I hate to say it, it just adds work. But
Yeah, but I
if
mean,
you're
something that
having
takes you
problems with
10 minutes is
accountability,
great.
accountability goes both ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. And communication is often where I see things fall flat everywhere. At the end
Yeah.
of the day, it's all about effective communication, you
Oh my
know?
gosh. I have loved this. I think this is great. And I should have you back so we could talk about performance improvement plans because I think there's so many ways that those are leveraged. I think there are so many ways that they could be beneficial. Shucks, man, we could even get into a conversation if there's such a thing as good or bad turnover, because that has always been a big debate about like turnover is all bad, turnover could be good. But what we'll do is we'll have you back.
Okay. I have lots of
Um,
thoughts on turnover too.
we'll bring you back because I just think that again, when you think about the basics of leadership, just go back to the core of I'm a leader, I'm trying to survive in this role. HR is meant to be a resource. It is
Absolutely.
meant to be a function to help you. I think where things can sometimes go off the rails is when we are not prepared to help ourselves when we engage that resource. And so that's why I'm so appreciative that you came on today to have this conversation so that we can help people think through what is HR? What is it not? And it's not your party planner, just as a reminder. And
We
I would
like
also,
parties, but not always planning them.
I mean, Um, so, okay. So before we end, because I like to ask this last question. If there's one piece of insight or wisdom you would like to share with leaders out there about what we've discussed today, what is the one thing you would like to leave with them?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Get to know your HR leader, whether it's the business partner, the chief people officer of a smaller organization, director, whatever the title is, irrelevant of title. Get to know them and make sure that they're aware of what your team does, how you operate, what are what's the company culture and best practices in operating as a leader. Just really understand that and have that rapport and relationship with them and get to know them a little bit personally, and vice versa. HR leaders, get to know your people too. I think that's so crucial, because the more you can get to know each other and have, again, really be on that same page, both professionally and personally, within reason, of course, you're going to have greater trust,
Yeah.
more meaningful relationships and communication. It really benefits everybody. And I truly believe that. That's why I care so much about what I do, because I care about people. Started as a young child as a people pleaser, trying to let that go, but it's really hard. But yeah, I mean, I think, and at the end of the day, we're all human. I think that's probably like my like part two of my takeaway. We're all people. We're not robots. Yes, AI is helpful, but robots are not taking over all of our jobs, most of our jobs, and new jobs will evolve out of those that do become more AI driven. But, at the end of the day, be empathetic, be considerate of, maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe something awful is going on in their life. Maybe they just got a horrific phone call right before your meeting. You just don't know. And I'm not saying inquire necessarily, but ask, how are you? Just remember that on both sides, that leaders and HR leaders are people.
Yeah. And I'll round it out with a third suggestion.
Yes,
Um,
please.
think through your documentation strategy. If there's one thing I wish I had figured out earlier in my career was, how do I want that strategy? Like, it's a strategy. Like, how
Yes.
do you want to take notes? Because that drives how you hold people accountable. And if you end up in a pickle, a bad spot as a leader, that is the make or break when you use the resource of HR, because they can only help you to the extent you help yourself. But I
Absolutely.
do love that you guys are human. And like I said, my bestest of friends are HR people, and I watch the emotional and physical toll it takes on them. And so, cannot echo enough is just remember they're people too, and they have bad days too. And I like that. Ask if they're okay. That's a good
Yeah.
one.
And we want to know you're okay too, right? Because we want strong leaders who feel empowered in their work and that they're empathetic towards their team and vice versa. Again, not all cultures are that way, but the best ones I've seen are.
Jill, thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, we're definitely going to have you back because getting into that performance accountability stuff, I think, is an area that people fear, struggle with. So let's come back and talk about how do we do that better. I think that would be an
Absolutely.
amazing conversation. But until then, thank you so much, and I can't wait to have you back.
Thank you. I look forward to my return in the future.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of We've All Done It. I know your time is valuable. That's why I am for as little BS as possible. Hopefully, today's episode has sparked some new ideas for you. If you would like to learn more about the We've All Done It leadership framework or how to work with me, please check out my website at kimberlyjbenoit.com. Until next time.